Hey there, everybody. This is Eddie Babbage, founder, CEO of Timeline Genius, your host here of the Wedding Industry Insider Podcast. And I've got a fantastic interview lined up for you today. Very excited. I'm here with Don Mamone. They are a keynote speaker and identity coach, and they and their wife successfully own and operate a photography business. They've been doing that for the last 17 years. And they have 25 years of experience in the hospitality industry. Don, thank you so much for being here. I am genuinely excited. One of the more exciting pre-interviews that I've had in a long time. I'm honored and privileged to have you here on the podcast with us.
Well, then we are in similar territory because I'm honored to be here, Eddie. Thanks for inviting me to share some time, some experience, and some knowledge with your listeners.
Awesome. So just to kind of set the stage, and I mentioned this, Don, in the pre-interview, I've had the privilege of doing this podcast for years and years, and have had so many people on. And there's one theme. If I could pick one theme that towers and just kind of stands out above all others as people are trying to share their wisdom, right? Mm-hmm. It's that they tell wedding planners, wedding professionals, heck, all of us, that there's only one you. Never has been, never will be another you. And you want to find that individuality, hard though it may be sometimes to do. You want to find that individuality and tap into it and shine that light and individuality out into the world through the prism of your profession. Mm-hmm. And what really captivated me about what we were talking about in the pre-interview is, you're like, that's my message, and that's what I want to help people do. So that's what we're going to get into. But before we do, can you please tell people, Don, in a little bit more detail, just who you are and how you got to be where you currently are?
Well, that is a very long story, and I've not necessarily mastered the art of brevity, but I'm going to do my measured best to synopsize it for you and for the listeners. I am Don Mamone. My pronouns are they, them. I identify as non-binary, and that has been the greatest, most rewarding journey of my life. When I graduated from college in the 1999, so before the turn of the century,
That's when I graduated.
I love everything about that. I was living a dream life in Southern California. I just graduated from school at the University of California, Santa Barbara. I immediately went into the hospitality industry, and I loved everything about it right up until I didn't. And I think that my journey was beautiful and wonderful. But as I got older and I realized that the commitment of hours and the commitment of time in a hotel really it wasn't where I wanted to be and what I wanted to be doing. And so I took a job in corporate America for that same hotel company. And I moved to Dallas, sight unseen. I'd been here one time, and I just kind of picked up digs and moved here. And shortly after moving here, the project that I was on was canceled, and I was going to go back to hotels, and thought, that's not going to bring me joy. That's not going to bring me happiness. And so what do I get to do? And as a hobbyist in the photography arts, I always felt happiest when I had a camera in my hand. And so I committed time and energy and effort to learn and grow and mentor under some different photographers. And before you knew it, I was a full-time photographer. I met my wife. We started talking about photography. I chased her until she caught me. And then we basically got married and started the business that we've been running for the last 17 years. I think the watershed moment for me in my journey, both personal and professional, because there is an intersection there that is undeniable, was the birth of my daughter. We had Frankie when we had been married for 7 years. It was 2016. And right after her birth, Eddie, I started to, I think, struggle a great deal with my own personal identity. And the struggle came from, I think, the feelings of, oh, you're a parent, and you know how this is because your beautiful son there, I believe Robert, is the light of your life. And you're like, I got to keep this thing alive, and I've got to teach it all the things. And so there was the sort of pressures that you have as a parent, but it was bigger than that. And it was on a very hot day in August of 2017 that I looked at my wife, and for the first time ever, literally in 41 years, on this planet said to her, there's something different about me. And I will leave it there and we can pick up that conversation. But that was the moment that changed my life in all the best ways forever.
Okay, Don, thank you so much for sharing that. And there's so many different directions that I want to go, but let's dive in right where you kind of left off in that story with that profound and life-changing moment.
Yeah.
Where you were talking to your wife. Can you take me a little further there and kind of take me further down the story path and tell me where did that lead?
Yeah. I imagine that you and your audience might be thinking, that is a scary moment. And yeah, you talk to your wife in a park on a hot summer day, but so what? How is that a defining moment in one's life? I think that when we are in a place of seeking authenticity, we have something to overcome before we can even admit what authenticity looks like for us. And that's that throughout the course of our life, we in a large part learn and are unfortunately sometimes shown in very real, mean, and hurtful ways that authenticity, unique, different equals broken. And therefore, when we find ourselves looking at who we are, how we want to show up in this world, things about our identity that are core inside of us are seen as broken, immediately we give way to one of the other human tendencies, and that is seeking belonging and acceptance. And so what do? We bury it, we hide it, we deny it. And so for me on that day, in front of my wife, to say to her, there's something different about me. And I'll be candid, Eddie, at the time, I didn't have the language. I didn't have the representation to sort of even refer to. I really just said, there's something different about me. And as best I can remember, it was a pretty emotional moment, but as best I can remember, I said something to the effect of, I mean, I know I'm a male assigned at birth and there's male inside of me, but there's also female or feminine energy or some sort of woman inside of me that I have told is not allowed to exist for the last 41 years. And I'm not going to do that anymore. And I'll tell you this, all the emotion, all the inability to sort of crystallize exactly what was said, there are two things that I remember. And my wife asked me, why did you hide this from me for so long? And the second was, why did you decide to tell me now? And it was in that moment I was like, oh my God, I did hide this from you. And I never hide anything from Emily. We have that kind of relationship where everything was on the table and we talked about everything. And I think it's because it was buried so deep, it didn't feel like a lie. It felt like reality. And so I told her that I had just convinced myself it was never something I was ever allowed to talk about or be. And so it was just human nature for me to just be what I allowed myself to be, not who I truly was. And the reason was my daughter. She was 9 months old, Eddie. And when I looked into her eyes and I thought, what a precious gift, I'm going to teach her by way of how I show up and what I'm allowing myself to be that is far less than what I actually am. I'm going to teach her to do that. And no amount of effort on my part to tell her, you get to love anybody you want, be anybody you want, do anything you want. She would look at me and eventually see through it. And I refused to be that role model for her. And so that's why it was sort of the birthplace of something beautiful, is I decided to go forth in the world, regardless of the outcome, authentically from that day forward forever. Now, it took time. It didn't happen overnight. It was definitely a considerable amount of work, but in my keynote speeches and in my identity coaching that I do and in the book that I'm writing, my goal is to help every single person on the planet love everything about themselves unconditionally and live their life unapologetically so that they can accomplish every dream they've ever had.
Damn, that's powerful. Don, my mind is going in so many directions. The one thing I want to do is to just pop up here on a meta level and let people know we are going to obviously tie this to your profession. But I also love how you very eloquently and offhandedly said there's really not this huge disconnect, especially if you're running your own business, between who you are as a person and your business. Those two things are so tightly bound together. And I think we have to get into this personal side of you in order to really have the context to go into the professional. So I'm going to stick with this for a minute. On a meta level, I also just want to call out, and I mentioned this in the pre-interview, I am just struck by, and maybe I'm just imputing who I am and how I would feel if I were having your, empathetically having your experience. And I know we're two different people. That said, it strikes me that you are remarkably courageous. And that is something that has, over the years for me, become a very important attribute when it comes to business. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
think about it that way. Like, as an entrepreneur, I started my first company back in 2003. But over the years, I've definitely come to believe that you need to be brave. You need to have courage, and just so amazing and inspiring to see. Um, where'd the courage come from?
Well, that's an interesting question. And in order to address that, I want to share with everybody that number one, I appreciate the compliment. Thank you for acknowledging the courage and bravery it takes to be who we are, in addition to do what we do. Right? For me, there's a very big difference amongst them, even though they're intersected. Is I want to encourage and usher forward a time and a place where everybody just gets to be who they are. And in doing that, they get to figure out who that is. For me, the courage
Mm,
comes from a commitment to myself and to others. And that courage is implicit. And the reason I say that is because fear is implicit. And
mhm,
I tell people, if you are charging into your life, personal and professional, and you're like, I just want to be fearless today, please note that fear always exists. If it doesn't, it means you're not pushing yourself to the degree that you might be able to push yourself. Fear is a
mhm,
signposter, a sign marker on our journey forward towards discomfort and getting outside of our comfort zone and trying harder and pushing past the boundaries of what we know we're capable of. So fear is always there. What I tell people is you get to act courageously in the face of that fear. And ultimately, a good friend and associate of mine shared at one time. They said, the way I look at fear is like taking a kid on a road trip with you. You can't put it in the trunk, but you can't let it drive. And the reason isn't that great? The reason that's so beautiful is because we get to bring fear on the journey. We don't want to remove fear because of another quote that I absolutely love. It was Mario Andretti, famous race car driver, said, if you're not afraid, it means you're not driving fast enough. If you're not a little bit
mm.
afraid and you feel everything's under control, then you're not driving fast enough. And so I encourage everybody here to embrace fear, welcome fear, acknowledge and accept fear, take it with you, and then act courageously, sort of in contrast to that fear. And for me, it genuinely comes from showing up for others. Like every day that I get to stand up and say, this is me, people will see that and say, hey, I want a little piece of that. I want this to be me. I want part of my identity to be infused into my business and my brand and how I show up as a career driven professional. All the lines go in the right direction, Eddie, like all of them. And so it really is, I think, a bit of a cornerstone of how we get to operate in this world.
I love that, Don. And yeah, it's funny. I feel like, I love that we're, connected, in terms of just temporally, class of 99. Like, we have kind of seen the world. I watched
Mm-hmm.
like E.T. with my son last night, and I'm like, I was telling him, yeah, in the 80s, we rode on dirt bikes, and like that world is kind of gone, but we've kind of shared just the sort of same sort of time. And
Mm-hmm.
it's funny. I really over the years in my life at this stage, I'm 46 now, I've come to appreciate the notion of vulnerability and the power of opening up. And you don't want to be crazy and go into like a toxic environment and say, hey, just these are my deepest feelings and insecurities or doubts or whatever. But I kind of shared with you, in the pre-interview, that I just have, my wife and I just have this preternaturally close, deep, intimate, trusting bond
Mm-hmm.
and relationship. And just to see and be seen for exactly who you are is just, there's so much power in that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, again, that's what keeps coming up on these interviews,
Yeah.
that people need to be yourself, but it's not easy. And what do you do, Don? And I'm going to go ahead and make our segue here. And we
Yeah.
may come back to personal. I think we're going to kind of bob, weave, and kind of meander here as necessary. But to kind of start bringing this to the professional sort of topic, how do you help people? Like, what do you say to people to have them see who they are and to have the courage to lift that up into the world?
So I'm going to tell an anecdote. I'm a big storyteller, as you can imagine. My wife, Emily, who's both creative, talented, and an amazing partner in business and in life, is the interjector in our family. I say that I'm the orator and she's the interjector. I could talk for an hour straight and people are like, yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, Don, you're so insightful. And then Emily will interject and the entire world comes to a halt. You hear the proverbial record scratch. Everybody leans in because Emily doesn't offer much. She tends to watch and listen. And as a photographer and as a musician, it makes perfect sense. She's a watcher and a listener. And
Mm.
when she has something to offer, she's been percolating on it and it's something that she wants to share. And we were going out on one of the rarer nights when parents get to go out, and we were having a dinner out. And I remember exactly where we were sitting, Eddie. We were in traffic. I was driving, and she kind of leaned in and she says, I want to tell you something. And again, I heard that record scratch. I was like, yep, I'm all ears. And she said to me, Don, at 2 weeks into our relationship, I knew you were my person. And I knew that we were going to be together. I knew that we were going to be married, and I knew we were going to go on the best adventures ever. And I'm already getting overcome by emotion because, again, Emily's not a big orator. And so for her to have been thinking about this and sharing it, and then she went on to really have an incredible impact. And this is where the Maya Angelou effect steps in. People will forget what you said or did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. The way I felt in this moment, I will never forget it. She said, so Don, even though I knew at 2 weeks that you were my person and we would be married and go on all these great adventures, since coming out and acknowledging who you are, you have been a better everything. You're a better husband, parent, child, sibling, business owner, client, employer, like everything. And I thought, to come from someone that is your partner in life and in business to say that you're a better everything is so ubiquitous and global. I kind of became overwhelmed with emotion. And then I said, please don't make me cry. I've got mascara on. I don't want to mess up my going out makeup. I say that all joking aside, like it was very emotional. It was wonderful. And the reason I tell that anecdote as we bridge this gap between personal and professional and make it more of an intersection is when you do the work, and I'm going to tell you how to do that in 1 minute. So everybody get your pen and paper ready. When you do the work, it becomes more intrinsic, more native, more natural, more comfortable to just be rather than trying to do what you think you're supposed to do and the outcome. One of the benefits of that is you just become a more effortless, better at everything person. And so I'm going to give you my 4-step framework. It literally is the way in which I help people overcome the feeling of, I'm not allowed to do this. I'm not allowed to be this. If I show this part of myself to the world based on my personal, professional life in my brand, I'm going to, quote, lose customers. People are going to be repulsed. First of all, just for 1/2 second, before I share this framework with you, just remember, not everyone is in your audience. Not everyone is your client, and that's okay. Who you are is a beacon of light, and people will be drawn to that light, and some will get closer and bask in the radiance of your light, and others will be like, I don't want to have any part of this. Good. That's what we want. It's a beacon and a filter. So when the people fall through the filter, wish them well. Authenticity is born when we accept and acknowledge that different, unique, and special does not equal broken. It equals amazing. And so the first thing I tell people to do is when you're in that moment and you're feeling that awkward, uncomfortable feeling, acknowledge whatever it is that you're thinking about. And I use myself as an example. Anytime I would feel this feeling of being different the thing that I would never tell anybody. I would immediately hide it, deny it. I would not even acknowledge its existence. I couldn't even conceive of acknowledging its existence, let alone living in courage, like you so kindly have pointed out. So, number one, acknowledge it. It's there. It exists.
Mm.
The next thing that we get to do is we get to accept it. No good, no bad. Everything's neutral. We get to accept it. It is, in fact, a reality. We've acknowledged it. There it is. We've accepted it, which means welcome it closer and just take a better look at it, a closer look at it. Start journaling on it. Try mindfulness. Talk to other people if you're comfortable in those safe spaces. Welcome it. Next, we get to embrace it. Now, I don't know about you, Eddie, but when I think about embracing, I literally think about the physical idea of an embrace. What is an embrace? It is a big, warm, cozy, feeling-inducing hug. So bring this thing about you that you've been pushing off to the side, couldn't even imagine acknowledging. You finally acknowledge and accept it, embrace it, love it. Grow to love it. Now, that's a lot of work. Once you finally get there, keep in mind, this isn't linear. Sometimes you'll jog back and forth between them. Other times you'll need to stall out for a period of time. Once you finally are comfortable in that place of embracing this thing about you, whatever it is, you take ownership of it. You own it in a way that you usher it forward into the universe and you make your life and the lives of the people around you better because of it. And this is the cool part, Eddie. This is the moment when people realize that the thing about them that they thought was their kryptonite is really their superpower. And it changes everything.
So powerful. So many thoughts. One thing I want to call out here. Oh gosh, so many thoughts. On a more mundane, but I still feel like very important level, I just want to call out that from a business standpoint, this is what you just said is what marketing people all say, like, please know that your service, your brand is not for everybody. Mm-hmm. And if you're trying to be for everybody, you're going to be for nobody. So right. I just want to kind of, again, just kind of
and let me add on to that. Just to tie the bind, right? The ties that bind between your identity and your brand. I've got a way of saying it. So get your pen and paper out and write this down. And I'm sure Eddie can put it in the show notes because I think this is the one that I share with my clients that really drives it home. Once you do that work, and I always lead with this type of work because if you don't go in this order of operations, right? There's no right way to do this. But if you don't do it in this way, you're going to find yourself to a certain degree chasing that proverbial tail because you haven't really found comfort in unearthing the things about you. Once you do, your brand becomes an extension of your identity. And your marketing becomes an extension of your voice. And what that means is show up, shine bright, get loud, be clear, and take up massive space in your market. You suddenly become one of one instead of one of many, and you will differentiate yourself in one of the most saturated of markets. I don't care where you are. I don't care what you do. If you go through this process and you make your brand an extension of your identity and your marketing an extension of your voice, no one can compete with you. You have clients that will beat down your door that become your ideal client because they're now looking for who you are more than what you do. And that is a huge differentiator in the marketplace.
You know, it's funny, Don, I prefaced what I was saying by kind of saying it's mundane. Generally speaking, on other interviews or podcast episodes I've done, I wouldn't even frame it that way because that's a very deep and penetrating business insight. But you've gone multiple levels deeper in the stack here. Mm-hmm. You're getting at, in my mind, like again, at this age, I don't know if it's that I'm more conscious of the fact that like life is not a dress rehearsal because I've lost my dad and lost my, sister-in-law who was basically my sister. Like you get to a point where you're like, oh, no. It's not just trite to talk about, like, it's hackneyed to be like, tomorrow's not promised. No. It's not promised. Like, you might not wake up tomorrow. There are people that aren't going to wake up tomorrow. This is a gift. And at this point in my career, I'm like, this isn't just about getting clients. This isn't just about making money. Yes, I want that and for the life that my family, all of that. But like, what are you doing with your life? This precious, undefined, yet finite amount of time that you have on this rock as we hurtle through space. Like, what are you here to do? And I feel like, and I won't wax overly. I know we all have different religious and philosophical, and, I'm a deeply spiritual person. And I believe, like, yeah, you were made special. Call it the universe, call it God, whatever label. I don't even want to, like, there's something inside you that's like this treasure and this gem, and you're teaching people how to unlock it. I want to ask a practical question, Don,
Sure.
which is some people hearing this, I don't want anybody to disengage by thinking like, well, my sexuality or identity, these like obvious earth shattering,
Hmm.
sort of aspects of a person's identity, like there's nothing there that I haven't necessarily disclosed, but like, I feel like everybody has something. What are other types of things that people may not be revealing that are like these sources of uniqueness and power? Like, are there other things
Yeah.
that you've seen clients kind of tap into?
Yeah. So you have just unintentionally stumbled on so much awesomeness that I'm about to disclose. Um, for me, raise the roof. For me, as an identity coach, obviously, I put identity in front of coach because I genuinely create. I believe in people a want and a desire to achieve greatness through being who they are. Do you ever look up a definition for something and you realize that the definition doesn't really help describe what that actually is? Like scary, the act of being scared. Like it sort of uses itself
Right,
to define
right,
itself.
right, right.
In my work and in my journey, I was digging deep into identity, and that's how I felt. A lot of the definitions for identity were cryptic and difficult and hard to understand, and so I created one on my own. And I created that definition based on my journey and my experience. And I'm going to share it with you now. And then I'm going to talk about all of the different things that go into identity that people are probably in some way or another reluctant to offer up.
Hmm.
Identity is our foundation for personal development and social participation. It serves as our foundation and filters for how we process everything in this world, and it impacts how we see the world and how the world sees us. That's basically in a nutshell. And I know that that sounds complicated, but when we start to break it down, what I want people to understand is there are influences and experiences that happen in your life that shape to a certain degree how you show up in this world. And sometimes it means that it enhances or shines a light on everything about you that's beautiful. And other times it teaches you a hard, mean, unfair lesson about the fact that you're not allowed to be that thing. And I'll tell you an anecdote to help crystallize this idea for you, because the foundations and filters that we exist in are everything. It's who we grow up with, it's where we grow up, it's the religion we grow up, it's the politics we grow up, it's the language we speak in our home, it's the schools we go to, the friends that we have. All of it contributes to this experience. And I was coaching someone and just happened to be a photographer, although I coach people in all kinds of different disciplines. And I said, tell me why you're a wedding photographer. And they said, I love love. I've just always loved the idea of love. And I was like, that's
Hmm.
amazing. But that's you and every other photographer on this planet. If you don't love love and you're a wedding photographer, then you're shady, because you just don't. You're not showing up for that couple. You're showing up for that paycheck, is what I would
Right,
suspect. And so
right.
we get to acknowledge that. Okay, fine, that's amazing, that's wonderful, but that's the same amongst all of you. And so we went through this exercise, and it happened to be in a small group environment. I do a lot one-to-one, but I do some small group. It was a small group. And I said, listen, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions and you get to answer them to the degree to which you're comfortable, because I try in every way to create safe spaces. And I think that she felt pretty safe there. And she kept answering them. And I said, keep going deeper. Why do you love love? What is it about your existence? Where does it come from? And we kept going and going and going and going and going. And it came to a time where I helped her craft her brand story, her brand identity, and the voice with which she got to share it with the world. She was afraid to share that she was a person of faith, that she comes from a large family, because she was worried that if people weren't particularly faithful, they would struggle identifying with that. They would, think that she was some religious zealot. She had all these preconceived notions and all this trauma and baggage around the fact that she didn't think that she was allowed to share that. It turns out, Eddie, that every Sunday for her entire youth, she would go to church in the morning with her immediate family and her extended family. And then she would go to, Mima and Papa's house. And they had this beautiful property with this gigantic lake. And they would have brunch and they would walk to under the pond and they would feed the farm animals and do all the things, this beautiful, wonderful little house on the prairie existence for at least that day. And she used to watch her Mima and her Papa walk hand in hand and think, this is the most amazing feeling to see that these people have been married for the better part of 50 years. They are the matriarch and the patriarch of this beautiful family of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And when I photograph a wedding, I realize that I get to document and be a part of the origin of what may look like this in 50 years. And I never want to give that up. Do we think maybe that we've landed on her identity and her brand story and who she is and how she gets to show up? And if somebody says, yeah, listen, I don't really believe in God and I'm not very faithful, and so you're not my photographer, we don't worry about them, do we, Eddie? Because we are going to attract the people that benefit and value and appreciate our existence, even if they're not the same. You and I in the pre-interview talked about different personalities, different ways of showing up. And I shared with you, people don't have to be exactly like me. People have to show up authentically in life and respect and appreciate and understand that others get to show up authentically in life and in business. And so I say all this because every piece of her identity, her large family, her faith, the fact that she's a woman, the fact that she at that time was unmarried, all of that she gets to be remarkably proud of, and it gets to be part of her brand identity and her marketing voice to attract her dream client that says, you can stop talking now, give me the contract, here's our money. Because we resonate with this story. This is so unbelievably beautiful. We want you to be a part of our day. That's how it happens.
As a wedding planner, you know how important it is to create detailed wedding day timelines for your events. But creating your timelines can be a tedious and time-consuming job. Until now. Because Timeline Genius lets you create beautiful, detailed wedding day timelines with ease. And it keeps everything you need on the wedding day in one central place. Here's how it works. First, Timeline Genius saves all your clients, vendors, and venues in your Rolodex, so you don't lose time looking for their information. And when you're ready to create a new timeline, you simply enter the key information for your wedding. Click a button, and voila! Timeline Genius magically gives you a customized timeline for your event, where all the details are laid out and the times are calculated for you. From there, you can easily edit your timeline by adding or deleting items, inserting images, changing font styles, and customizing everything to your liking. You can also instantly shift the times for as many items as you want. And when it comes to your clients and vendors, Timeline Genius lets you give them the highest level of service. You can send them tailored timelines, showing only the items they're involved in. And you can collaborate by inviting them to a mobile-friendly, web-based version of the timeline. You can even set text message reminders to automatically go out on the wedding day. And once you've completed your perfect timeline, you can download it or email it out as a beautifully styled PDF. And that's Timeline Genius, a smart software that will help take your wedding planning to the next level. Start your free trial today.
So, Don, I think that's so powerful. Like, you can feel the energy in what you were saying, like, and it almost makes me think. And again, this is not normally how I would talk on an interview, but again, just maybe this is an aspect of me that I'm not as upfront about, like I'm huge into meditation. And, at this point in life, again, I think we're here for something. It's not just these mundane making money, but I feel like there's a spiritual power in what you just shared. Like, there's some way in which I kind of had this thought as you were, at various points when you're talking, like that there's almost like a spiritual energy that is being dissipated as long as we are working to repress aspects of who we are, and that there's just some inherent, intangible, yet tangible in another way, and visible power that we get when we throw those shackles off and say, this is me. Like there's just some light and energy and power in that. You can even feel it in what you were talking about with your client. Another thing, this concept of identity is so powerful. And I want to delve a little further into it, Don, because in my own sort of experience, and there's this guy, John Assaraf, he was one of the coaches that kind of chimed in on the book, The Secret. And something that he very squarely hit was most of us have developed our so-called identity unintentionally, right? We were fed beliefs, all of the inputs and stimuli that you mentioned, like church, like environment, school. And over the years, we developed this like mental construct of who we are. I am a father. I am a lawyer. I'm whatever, right? We have this intangible construct, and that construct has a huge effect on our success, that we can actually step back and be and actors, like in Will Smith's memoir, actually, he talked about this, we'll set aside slapping somebody at the Oscars. It's actually a very profound book. We're all flawed, no judgment here, but like, it's really profound. Like the book is actually, and I read it before that whole incident, but he talked about something. He's like, as an actor, you start to see just how malleable identity is, because that's your job to step into the identity, in his case, of being Muhammad Ali. So you throw yourself into this, and talk to me a little bit more. Let's go a little deeper down the path of the power of identity and the role that it plays in your professional success.
Yeah. So in my definition, I said that identity serves as our foundation and filters for how we process everything. And the reason that I define those two things is because I fundamentally believe, much like the contributor to The Secret that you mentioned, that so much of our identity happens before we have two unbelievably critical things: a voice and a choice. From basically birth, we start to develop and we start to have influences and experiences around us every minute of every day. And what happens is, over time, those things take root inside of us and they form our foundation without our knowledge and without the ability to choose. So we can't say anything about it. I doubt very highly that there's a 4-year-old out there somewhere saying, well, thanks for your contribution, mom and dad, but I don't really align with that. And so I don't think I'm going to allow that to become part of my identity. It just happens. Right. That's the foundation side of it, Eddie. Now, there's a lot of people in this world that believe humans are capable of change. I think we can change our behaviors. I believe we can change our reactions. I think we can change our jobs. We can change a lot of what we do. I do not believe that we get to change who we are at our core, which means oftentimes our identity. And so the other part of my definition is filters. I believe that we get to lay filters over our foundation as we grow and as we develop the ability to have a voice and a choice. And what this looks like in everyone's life differently, but the one common is they say, yeah, thank you so much for that effort, but it doesn't align with my core values as I grow, and I'm going to choose to either conform to this or rebel against it. And for me in my life, and I'll use myself as an example, I grew up in a very open, loving, kind home, inclusive, believed in everyone's rights, but it was a conventional home by way of sort of gender expression and sort of gender ideology. I grew up in the 80s. You know how it is. You graduated in 99, just like me. There was no representation. I do jokingly say that like the gender benders of my generation were rock stars. David Bowie, Culture Club, like all those folks that were growing long hair and wearing makeup, they were rock stars. It didn't resonate. Yeah. It wasn't representation for me. I was not a rock star, right? I was a little kid growing up in the Southwest. And so there's a moment in our lives where we get to say, hey, I have a voice and a choice now. And those of us that are endeavoring to change who we are, it's foundational, Eddie. It's like trying to dig up the foundation of your home with a teaspoon. You can try and you can want it. It's just not going to work. And so what do? We lay stuff over it. We put stuff over it to say, This is something that someone taught me. This was an experience or an influence that I had. I'm not going to believe that. It does not align. I am okay rebelling against this thing. The difficult thing is, remember when I said earlier that we seek belonging and acceptance? If you live in a family and in a home that has a certain belief system that no longer aligns with who you are, using your voice and making your choice means oftentimes alienating those people. If they're not open-minded and open-hearted, it means a confrontation that a lot of people aren't ready for. And so these are the moments and the times in life where you hear about people finding new friends, new chosen family, new people that are loving and accepting of their voice and their choice as they step fully into becoming who they genuinely are. The tendency might not change. The root foundation certainly, in my opinion, can't change. But what can change is our way of augmenting it. I'm going to use myself for one final example before we move on to the next burning question that you might have. I have spent my entire life being an incredibly judgmental individual. I know exactly where it comes from. I know exactly how it got instilled there. I have tried my entire life to say that I'm not judgmental. I don't want to be judgmental. I looked at people that were glaringly different, glaringly obvious, people with dramatic tattoos, dramatic hairstyles, dramatic fashion. And for the better part of my life was like, oh, somebody wants attention. I would say the most inauthentic to me things because it was just in there. And so the filter under which I exist now is I'm not judgmental, I'm curious. And instead of saying those things and thinking those things and believing those things, if the immediate thing is like, wow, look at that person and their sleeve of tattoos, I might go to, that's weird, that's different, that's stupid. Why would anybody spend all that time and money? It's going to look silly when they're 80. All the things that judgmental people think, I shut it down. And I will literally walk up to a stranger and be like, hey, I noticed your ink. I'm not a tattoo person. I don't think I'll ever get one, but I love it. Could you tell me more about where that tattoo comes from? What's your favorite tattoo? What's your favorite tattooing experience? And suddenly the judgmental goes away and it gets replaced by curious.
It's so interesting, Don, that you just shared that because and I find oftentimes in life and in business, there are these sort of principles that on a surface level seem almost paradoxically like contradictory, but that actually both are valid. And I 100%, it deeply resonates with me, this notion that, I mean, like I said, I think God put something inside all of us that is us and it's unique and it's special and it's who we are. And I agree, you don't want to go trying to change that. That's where the problems come in. And it's the antithesis of everything that we're talking about. We want to discover who that is and have the courage to lean into that. And I'm trying to reconcile that with another sort of powerful insight that resonates with me. And you just spoke to it, that there are aspects of our so-called identity that are malleable and that we have unintentionally, unconsciously, and without any power or say in the matter, as you said, been fed and developed notions that I'm just not somebody, I'm a procrastinator, right? I'm pulling this out of thin air. Why do you believe that? Well, there are these experiences. Well, that is something if you do the introspection and you look at all of your beliefs about yourself and you may realize wait a minute. Does this belief that I'm a procrastinator, is this helping me move faster toward my success or is it limiting my success? Clearly it's in the latter category. Well, this isn't my height. It's not some definite, concrete, incontrovertible fact. I can rewrite that story. And that's kind of where these self-limiting beliefs. But to me, rewriting that belief, or in your case, rewriting the belief that you are judgmental or that aspect of your identity, you can do that, but it's not like rewriting the core of who you are. And if anything, that thing may be obfuscating and detracting from the core of who you are, I don't know. That's a little fuzzy, but I feel there's something really powerful about both of these things.
I think you're spot on. I think that sometimes something that we think is something that's a part of our identity is also being triggered or being placed inside of us by. So it's funny, if you tell people two of the things that I think I've struggled with for a good portion of my life now, they would likely not believe you unless they knew me then. And when I say then, I mean like as a younger individual, somebody who is not.
Judgmental thing is so surprising. You
Right?
seem like the most accepting, just like you're emanating from the time we first got on camera. You emanate an energy of just like, you can just be you in my presence. Like, I am accepting who you are.
And
like,
that is a tremendous example of the idea that you, like you said, they're malleable. We get to change them in a sense of how we act in accordance with and in alignment with what our true identity is. Like, I want to be loving, accepting, courageous, all the things that we've talked about. That doesn't mean that my knee jerk, that the sort of foundational thing inside of me wants to push me in one direction. It's like a knee jerk reaction. It's autonomic, that I'll see something and even if I don't acknowledge it verbally or I shut it down immediately, I just have this tendency. The other one is anger. Now, I don't believe the anger was placed inside of me. I believe the anger was a symptom of all that energy that you talked about, all that life force that I had to dedicate to making sure nobody found out my secret. Nobody was privy to the thing that I was repressing. I was also a perfectionist, Eddie. And that's because if I was a perfectly cast vase and I had all that veneer, one crack in the veneer meant somebody would see just how broken I am. So I had to always do things a certain way. So as we uncover, accept, embrace, take ownership of, right? All those things. As we do that process, things become even more sort of malleable. Now, again, we don't change who we are. We don't change the foundation was laid. Right. We create these filters, and to Will Smith's, like, we work at being the person that we know ourselves to be and we're capable of being. I will share one more thing that I think is really important, because you touched on like some things that we identify as a part of us. I've, in my work, decided that there's a difference between identifying with something and identifying as something. In order to tell this story, I use the example of A Tale of Two Surfers. And I grew up in Southern California, and I tried surfing a couple of times, Eddie. 5 a.m, still dark outside. You go down to the beach. It's freezing cold. You put on a wetsuit that's hard to get on. You get sand all over yourself. You get out into the water. You try to catch a couple of waves. When the sun comes up, you go back, you get home, you take a nice hot shower, and then you race off to high school. I tried it like 3 times, and I was done. I never got on a surfboard again. I never dragged my butt out that early in the morning in that cold weather. I did not identify with or as being a surfer, but there were people out there that it was their church. It was their faith. It was their spiritual moment every day. And the way that I differentiate between identifying with something and as something is, if I took 2 of those surfers and after they graduated from college, I said, here's the deal. I'm going to pay each of you $500,000 to join my company, but you have to come work for me in Denver. The person that identifies as a surfer would politely decline because they can't imagine living away from the ocean and not surfing every day. The person that identifies with surfing and enjoys it would be like, cool, I'll snowboard. Give me that $500,000. I'm going. And it's so important to acknowledge those things that we identify with versus as, because something is fundamentally who we are at our core, and it contributes to who we are and our business and how we show up in the world. And the other part of it is something that we enjoy, and it really resonates with us. And it's definitely a part of how we operate, but it's something that we could kind of take or leave, right, at any time. And so I think it's important that as we do this work, we really differentiate who we get to be, who we are, what's intrinsically part of us, and what's part of just something that contributes to those things.
I love that, Don. And what do people do here? We've talked about these sort of the steps, right? If there's a part of yourself that you've been kind of pushing down, repressing, not wanting to kind of ultimately embrace and let manifest in your life. We talked about those steps. What else? And you kind of went through this a little bit when you were talking about the client and, the faith, the exercise of kind of getting to her real, true sort of expression of her true self and identity. But for everybody listening, Don, like that is like, I get it. I love the power. Like, yeah, I want to find my thing, my unique treasure trove and source of power, Don. Like, how can I do that? Like, what can they do to find it and then to bring it into their business?
I mean, they got to really want it is the first thing. I think that, the steepest climbs create the greatest views. And I think there's people that hope that there's kind of a shortcut. And I want to encourage everybody to tell you that it's never easy, but it's always worth it. And I think one of the realizations that that I had was throughout the course of my life, I always worried about the fallout, the consequences. What would I lose? What would this cost me? And it wasn't until I really stepped fully into who I am that I realized that the windfall is way greater than the fallout. And that the cost I was paying was far more than the cost of being authentic and showing up. And so for me, the process was about getting tastes along the way. It's not something, and I don't mean to be cagey. I don't mean to sort of seem as though I'm not giving you all the goods, but it's different for every single person. Personally, I'm going to talk about brand and identity in a minute, but personally, going through this journey is a little different for everyone. And so what I tell them to do is just start. Just start on the 4 steps I've talked about. It is one of those things that the more you see it and the more you get of it, the more you want of it. And so it is a self-propelling, momentum-building process. As I started to show up and shine bright and feel better and feel more authentic, I couldn't stop doing the things that helped feel that way. One more quick anecdote before I talk about business. I call them the mirror moments that I would have. Very transparently, as I was exploring my gender identity and my gender expression, I again was so fortunate I won the lottery, and my wife said, hey, you're my person, and we're going to go on this journey together, and whatever that looks like, it's going to be amazing. And so she would help me with gender expression, clothing, accessories. She taught me how to do makeup. And for a period of time, I would do it alone because I wasn't comfortable having other people there, even my wife. And she would bring something home and say, Don, I bought this for you. I thought it would look good on you. Why don't you try it on and tell me what you think? And I would look in that mirror and those voices would start. The voices about being broken, about being stupid, about people pointing and laughing. This is going to cost you your business. Clients aren't going to want to work with you. They're going to think you're weird. And I would take it off and I would cry the ugly, sobbing, awful tears that come along with an inability to find that courage in that moment. And then one day, Eddie, and I really wish I knew exactly what I was wearing or what she had brought home. I don't. I just remember that it happened. And that's that I looked in that mirror and the voices started and I started to get emotional. And for just a brief minute, I felt something different. And the voices stopped and I heard something different. And this is that energy you talk about. This is that faith and that spiritual belief that the universe gives you what you want when you want it bad enough. I heard a voice that said, there you are. And I think that in that moment, I saw myself for the first time. No amount of thinking and no amount of voices took that feeling away. And so what happened was I got hungry for that feeling and I realized that you can't think your way out of that feeling. And so I kept doing what I needed to do in order to feel that way. And what I found was my emails sounded different, Eddie. I stopped writing these sort of bland. My favorite example was something, in fact, that I sent a note to a client. They said back, like, this is the funniest email you've ever written me, or this is this wins the internet for today. Something like that, because I would have normally written like, hey, I was checking your account and you have an invoice that's past due. Could you please remit payment at your convenience? And this time I said, hey, I don't know if you noticed by my last name, but I'm Italian. I noticed that you haven't paid in full and I don't want to send people after you. So that you don't get roughed up, like we need to hear the clink clank of pennies going into our piggy bank. Something funny, something outgoing. And it was me. It wasn't me that I thought I was supposed to be in my business. It wasn't the corporate tactical version of me. It was the truly authentic version of me. And so when I harnessed those feelings and I became that person, that I knew I got to be, all the governors and limiters that were imposed on me were gone. I get to choose. I get to choose how my brand sounds. I get to choose how my marketing shows up. I'm snarky. I'm funny. So I showed up snarky and funny. And I photographed differently. I emailed differently in a way that story resonates, where Emily said, you're just a better everything. And so we get to be unapologetically unique in ourselves and in our business and in our role. If you're a career-driven professional and you're listening to this, please know that if you're in sales, if you're in operations, you're going to be better at what you do. You're going to convert more. When people get to see you and know who you are, they're going to want to do business with you.
So powerful. Again, so many thoughts, and just deeply resonates with me what you're saying. One thing I want to call out, and I love you have really nice, colorful ways of kind of articulating things, but that the windfall, right? Like that this notion of windfall is greater than the fallout. Taking that sort of, like, my wife, like I oftentimes will be talking to her and I'm like, what will I want to have been my decision here if I'm on my deathbed? Not from a morbid standpoint, but again, it's coming to an end at some point. I find that encouraging or inspiring, because if we had 1,000,000 years, we'd really be like wasting time. We'd be like, I'll just do it later. What difference does it make? No. Time is precious.
Yep.
What do I want? And it's funny because I've read that when you talk to people, again, this is Ray, the idea of the windfall being greater than the fallout. When you talk to people who are at life's end and you ask them about their biggest regrets, they don't regret the things they did. They regret the things they wanted to do and didn't have the courage to do.
Yep.
That just really resonates with me, right? If you get to the end of life and you're like, I always wanted to do this, but I was scared of what other people would say. And I will say this, at this age, and I think like life, it's not like I'm some old guy, at least in my mind. I'm not old. My kids may see it differently, but I have changed a lot, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've kind of discovered on my journey, and I haven't done anything that, there's no real comparison. We're all on our unique journeys, but like, I'm not posturing as if I've had some huge life, like all I can say is over time, I have, I think, gotten more comfortable being myself, almost kind of like if we look back at high school, right, to maybe take like the quintessential time when you're trying to belong and you're like, like, what should I do? Well, what's going to make people laugh and think I'm cool? Like, it's not about like, but at this age, I do feel like I have grown incrementally more courageous and just kind of being myself. And that power that, again, that I hear, and it's almost like, there's magic. There's freaking magic in that notion, that energy that you're talking about when it flows and you're like, this is me. I'm like, that's the same thing that had Coltrane blowing the hell out of his saxophone.
Yep.
That's that universal intelligence. Like, it's flowing through this is me. And you're not scared and worried about this and that. No, like, hey, world, this is me, right? Yeah. There's just something so powerful and magical and beautiful about it.
Just to interject quickly, like, the way in which you distilled that is beautiful. That's exactly what it is. People's opinions of us, none of our business. You hear that kind of fun little saying frequently. You see it in memes. It's all over online. I want people to look at that and say, oh yeah, that's fun. That's funny. But I want them to hear your voice in what you just said. There's magic in living a life that is only based on what you desire most. And there's an old saying that was real big in the 90s. I think it's pretty big still now today, but like, dance like, I do this for my audience when I do a keynote. I'm like, somebody finish this for me, dance like, and everybody says, nobody's watching. It's an awful saying. I'm sorry for the person that originated it. I'm sorry for people that appreciate it. It's a terrible saying, because all that teaches us to do is, if people are watching, don't dance. And what I'm going to tell you is the magic you're talking about is the freedom in our head and our heart to dance however we want. no matter who's watching. It doesn't matter. And in that moment, you feel the freedom. That's what it is. So I said earlier, it's not the fear, it's the fragility. Act boldly, confidently in who you are and how you get to show up in this world. And on the other side of that is freedom to dance however you want, no matter who's watching. So you did such a beautiful job synopsizing that.
Right back at you, Don. Really beautiful words, and it just, for me, I feel like it ties into kind of, part of what we're here to do, which is to discover who and what we are and to embrace it. That it's just, really, really beautiful. I'm gonna have to get you back on at some point because I know I could do this for hours more with you. There's one question that I always get to, Don, in our interviews. And hopefully everybody's been as, inspired and touched and moved by your message and your story as I have been today. I feel like I'm on paper a conduit for great inspiration and motivation, just connecting you with our audience and the other guests. But selfishly, I grow, through conversations like this. Like I almost had the thought, I'm starting, and this is coming from like a former lawyer, math major, very science rational, kind of guy. But like, I'm like, is it really just accident that I'm talking to Don today? It's like,
probably not.
Are there coincidences, or does God sometimes send little neon? Yeah, here, universe. Yeah, I got the message. No, it's just really energizing. But the question that I ask of everybody toward the end of the interview, Don, is if you could give one piece of advice to everybody listening to help them as much as possible as they're doing the hard, challenging, but deeply fulfilling work of building their business, what would that one piece of advice be?
So I, as a photographer, of course, I'm going to have to tell a quick anecdote, and then I'll hit you with the exclamation point at the end of the story. Emily and I do a lot of corporate headshots now. So we actually don't do weddings anymore. We moved over to corporate nonprofit branding, things like that. Do a lot of high volume headshots, especially for large corporate companies that bring their national sales team in. And this was probably 2.5 years ago or so, as I was on my journey to authenticity, and I'd come out and I was expressing myself authentically. And I noticed that I was photographing a group of people, and this cycle would play itself out. People would get their photo taken. I'd do 2 or 3 in a row, and then they'd come and look at their photos. And it would sound something like this. And Eddie, I'm not going to mince words. They would literally look at their photo and be like, why is my hair doing that thing? Why do I look so fat? Oh my God, I look so old. And then the person standing next to them would say, oh my gosh, your hair looks great. I love your part on the side. No, you look really young. You look really beautiful. That shirt matches like your complexion so beautifully. And then when we would move forward to the person who was just being so kind to someone else, they would literally say, now look at me. I look fat. I look old. I look frumpy. I look dumpy. Whatever mean thing that would come to their mind, they would say about themselves. Now, I'm sure to a certain degree it was in an effort to maybe make the other person feel better. But largely what I did was I came home and Emily's like, hey, how was your job? I'm like, really, really emotionally scarring. I realized more than ever that people internalize criticism in a way that is unfair and unjust, and externalize praise in a way that they are doing everything for the other person and saving nothing for themselves. And so the advice that I give people is, when that internal monologue, the one that's in your head that you think is you because it's in your head and it sounds like you, starts going and saying things about you and to you that you would lash out at somebody else for saying, and you would be aghast and appalled if somebody else were saying it, please notice it. Notice it and shut it down and realize that it's not you. It's not your internal monologue. It's years of judgment and expectation and shame that has been thrust upon us by a largely judgmental society that likes to compartmentalize people into different places. Just acknowledge that you're an amazing human being, and whatever it is about you that you unearth, love it. I don't even care if you like it that much. I don't like the idea of being judgmental. I never liked the idea of being angry, but it's a part of me, and I get to love myself unconditionally, just like you get to love yourself. So ultimately, start to notice how nice you're being to yourself, how kind you're being to yourself, how supportive you're being to yourself, and accept and acknowledge that in doing this work and in creating your brand and showing up for your job, you get to love yourself unconditionally. You get to live your life unapologetically. And from that place, everything in your life will get better in the best ways.
That's beautiful, Don. You're a very special person. I really just grateful, privileged to have had you on here, and look forward to staying in touch. I'm sure I'm not the only person that you kind of evoke that, reaction in, because again, there's like, it's like Oprah says, she's like, it is law, like, that what you put out into this world is going to, she's like, it is law, it is law. I'm
like only Oprah can.
Oh, like only Oprah can.
Only Oprah can.
But I'm like, this lady, like, just look at the life. Like, she's not up there just flapping her jaws. Like, she's trying to give you the real stuff.
Yeah.
And there is, it doesn't mean that like necessarily, of course, good people get hurt sometimes and all that. Yeah. But if you're putting something out, it brings out like Abe Lincoln, like the better angels of our nature. But anyway, Don, if people want to connect with you, if they want to potentially work with you, like what is the best way for people to reach out?
Yeah. So donmamone.com. I'm sure you can put that in the show notes. First name, last name.com is where I have a lot of the information about me. It's where people can sign up for my email list. I'm working on a book. Pre-sales will hopefully be happening in Q3 of this year, give or take. I share a lot of content. I've got a blog. I write on Medium. So I'm not hard to find. I'm literally at Don Mamone on largely every social media app out there. So if they want to do the work and they want somebody to facilitate and support that with them, then go to the website, sign up for the email. I really and genuinely want to, and I'm committed to supporting people on their journey. So that's the best way to find me.
Absolutely beautiful. Well, Don, on behalf of our Timeline Genius community and all of our Wedding Industry Insider, podcast listeners, thank you so much for being who you are, for putting your light out there, and for taking the time to share it with us here today.
Thank you, Eddie. It's been an honor and a pleasure, and I look forward to chatting with you soon.